During a couples cooking class, I got too close to the chef. Now my husband refuses to speak to me. My husband won't talk to me, and it's because of something I did, something that I had always thought that he will never find out about. But he did, and now everything just feels so horrible. It's so hard living with a man who ignores you completely. It hurts badly, and I know it's all my fault. If I hadn't gotten close with Gerald, the chef at my cooking class, if I hadn't thought that my husband would continue to be that naive man that was always in love with me, a man who forgave me no matter what I did. Today makes it 5 years since James and I got married. James had promised that we would go on a trip together, the one we had been putting off because of our baby. I'm almost 7 months pregnant now, and the reason we had always skipped taking a trip since I got pregnant was because James was so scared of us losing the baby. I didn't get pregnant for almost 4 years of us being together. But the truth is, I was the one who wasn't ready. I kept using pills behind James's back. I didn't want to have any baby. I was barely 22 when James and I got married. I felt like I was too young to start a family, but I just couldn't resist marrying James when he asked me to. Honestly, I married James because of his money. When I met James, he had just lost his wife. I was employed by his mother as his housekeeper, but I saw an opportunity, so I seduced James. It was really hard at first, but after a few months I managed to pull it off. And after a year of sleeping with him, I made him marry me. I knew that James wanted children. His wife couldn't give him one, so I pretended like I was pregnant. James was so happy, and he proposed to me immediately. I told him. We got married a week after, but to make my plans more believable, I pretended to have a miscarriage. I purposely crashed the new car James gave me as a wedding gift, and pretended like that accident had made me lose the baby. Everything worked in my favor because James traveled for some work. I was supposed to go with him, but I wanted the time to perfect my plans. And it worked. James really believed me. He was sad about the baby, but I managed to cheer him up after days. I told him that we would get pregnant again if we kept trying. But that wasn't true. I didn't want a baby with James. I just liked his money. I wanted to go out, have fun with my wild friends, without being held back. And I thought a child would do that to me. So I used those pills and kept lying to James for years. This pregnancy was not planned for me. My pills had expired and I was going to replace them, but I forgot because I was busy with something else, or rather someone else. I didn't mean to cheat on James. All I really did from the beginning was just spend money. James didn't complain. He liked giving me money, and I loved it. My friends, they loved me, or should I say, they loved the money I spent on them. We would go on trips, but I paid for everything. They received VIP treatments at the spa we frequented because of me. Even when we go to restaurants, it was always the best ones. I really thought that they wouldn't exist without me because of how much they relied on me. Sadly, that isn't the case anymore. But despite the fact that I had everything I ever wanted, I still felt like I was missing something. I was bored. I thought it was because my friends had to work and I didn't. They had their jobs and only had weekends to spend with me. It meant I had to wait all the time for them to get less busy, and I hated it. I didn't like shopping alone without their praises or hanging out on my own, so I decided to get a hobby, something to keep me busy while the girls were too. I picked up different hobbies, but I grew bored easily. The first was painting, but I was really bad at it. The second was golf, but I dropped it after a week. Then there was pottery, reading, and the other. There was nothing that worked for me until I met him, Gerald. I first met him in a restaurant. I went there without my friends because they were busy as usual. I noticed him immediately as he walked into the restaurant. He came alone too. He sat at the table directly facing mine so I could see him totally. I tried to ignore his presence, but I really couldn't. I found myself watching him throughout that afternoon. He ordered a meal, and when it arrived, instead of eating immediately, he first smelt it, then tasted it. I just continued watching him. I didn't even mind that I was going to be tagged a stalker if I didn't stop. He called the waiter back and asked a few questions, and within a few minutes, a person came back with the waiter. It was the chef of the restaurant. They talked for a while before the chef left smiling. Gerald continued eating his meal, and I still kept watching him. It was only when he noticed me watching that I looked away. Then an idea, a stupid one, formed in my head. And before I could even process it in my head, whether it was good or bad, I was standing up from my seat and going to sit at Gerald's table. I introduced myself to him, and he did the same too. We started to talk, flirt, and it was then I found out he was a chef too. I also got to know that he taught master classes on cooking. I lied to him right there that I had been looking for a good cooking school because I had not been impressed so far, and Gerald had given me his contact information. I was really pleased with myself. All through that afternoon until Gerald left, I made no mention of James or the fact that I am married. It wasn't because I was ashamed of James, though. It was more because I forgot completely. Gerald is young and really handsome, and talking to him felt so new. I texted Gerald that evening, and he replied almost immediately. It was almost like he had been waiting for my text. I pretended like I was only texting to make further arrangements about the cooking lessons. Instead of going through the process that Gerald explained to me to register, I sent the money directly to him, and it was twice the amount he told me. I told him that I wanted personal classes with him instead. I didn't want to learn with other women, so I asked if he could come over every day on weekdays to teach me instead. To be honest, I didn't really need the cooking lessons. I wasn't a great cook, but I wasn't bad either. And learning to cook was a waste of time because I never cooked since I married James. It was all because of my selfish interest. I wanted to be close to Gerald, and I just did everything that I could get that, including ruining my life. Gerald agreed to teach me at home, but selected 3 days out of the 5 days I asked him for. I was okay with it, so we agreed. Gerald would come over on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I really thought it was lucky for me that James had a project that consumed most of his time, and he was mostly away during the week, but came back on weekends to spend time with me. I cannot lie and say that Gerald seduced me. He only went with what I initiated. It was all me. I was the one who did the destroying. I was the one who kept pushing and pushing until finally it was only after I signed up that Gerald found out I was married, and that made him withdraw from me. He didn't flirt with me as much as he did before. He even stopped texting me, except it was about a response to something about cooking, but I was determined to have him, at all costs. I didn't think that the cost would be this grave. Maybe if I had, I never would have made those mistakes. To make my plans work, I started to give the housekeeper some days off every week, particularly the days that Gerald had to be around. I didn't want anyone telling James anything. The only other person always around when Gerald was the security guard who only ever stayed in his quarters or at the gate. So I thought that I was perfectly safe. When Gerald started coming around the first week that he was at my place, I wore a very short dress that went up my thighs any time I tried to reach for something, but Gerald didn't do anything. He ignored my dress totally for the first week and managed to remain professional, but instead of giving up, it made me even more desperate. So the second week, I did something really crazy and stupid. I made it really difficult for Gerald to resist me. I showed up in a short towel barely enough to wrap my body. I pretended like I had just finished taking my bath and only came into the kitchen to show him the new place where I stored the pots. Gerald couldn't hold it together anymore and just held me. We had sex right there in the kitchen, on its floor. It was only after we finished everything that Gerald started to panic. He was afraid that if James ever caught him, he would be ruined, but I was too bold, confident even. I calmed him and told him we would never ever get caught. From then, our cooking sessions weren't anything related to cooking. In fact, on some days we never made it to the kitchen. The living room floor, the couch, even the walls were our special places. I was so addicted to Gerald and would even call him on other days to come around. But he couldn't because of his other cooking classes. So I only got to see him 3 times a week. At times, I was bold enough to let him sleep over at the house and leave really early. I bribed the security guard to keep his mouth shut about it. I was really sure that I was getting away with everything. Then I found out I was pregnant. I panicked when I found out. Because I couldn't even get rid of the baby in secret. I found out with James right next to me. I had been feeling sick that day, and James was at home. He decided to take me to the hospital, and the doctor conducted some tests and gave us the news. I was really scared when the doctor announced my pregnancy, but when he told us that I was already 2 months gone, I was a bit relieved. Gerald and I had only started sleeping together around that time, but 2 weeks later. I had been so caught up in my plans of getting together with Gerald that I completely forgot to replace my pills. James was pretty excited about the baby, and I decided to keep it. Not because I wanted to at that time, but because I thought I was redeeming myself. Not that James ever knew that. I pretended to be thrilled in his presence. When Gerald found out about my pregnancy, he stopped showing up at the house and even picking my calls. And instead of ending things like that, I got desperate again. I went to his apartment to convince him. Gerald started coming back to the house after I convinced him. I told him it didn't matter that I was pregnant. I told him that I had needs that he alone could satisfy. On some days, after we were done having sex, I even mocked James with him. I laughed when he called my husband rich but small. It was all because of me. I told him how James's thing was small and didn't satisfy me enough. I told him how made up for all of his sexual lack with money. I know. You guys probably think of me as the worst person on earth. But believe me, nobody can hate me as much as I hate myself right now. Gerald and I continued seeing each other until James first started to suspect my affair with him. I didn't know that day that James was going to show up unannounced. Gerald was around and we were doing our usual, this time in the room, when luckily I heard James's car drive into the garage. I panicked because there wasn't enough time to hide Gerald. So while he struggled with his shirt, I pushed him to the kitchen. And then I stayed in the room and tried to get rid of the evidence of our affair. I laid the bed as best as I could and used the air freshener to get rid of any scents. By the time I was done and came to the kitchen, James was already in there asking Gerald questions. Gerald, who was panicking, kept stammering and I had to rescue him. I told James that he ruined my surprise. I lied to him that I hired a chef to teach me how to cook because I wanted to cook something really special on our coming anniversary. It was obvious that James didn't believe my lies. Although he said nothing and just left the kitchen, I followed him immediately after telling Gerald to go. I wanted to convince James that I was telling the truth. It was only when I got inside the room and noticed how I looked that I panicked a little. My hair looked like someone who just rolled in the bed and my lipstick was smudged. I knew that just trying to convince James that there was nothing between Gerald and I with mere words wouldn't be enough. I had to look for something else to convince him with. Before then, I even told Gerald not to show up at the house. I was scared that James would have someone watching me, and then I came up with a plan. Another one of my plans that has not only ruined me, but has destroyed every chance of me being happy again. To avoid any further suspicions from James, I suggested to Gerald that he should arrange a couple cooking classes. My plan was to make James join me in it so that he didn't suspect me anymore. I was going to pretend like we had a platonic relationship, and I only really wanted to learn cooking. In order to get many couples to participate, I told Gerald to make it free. I paid for every expense, and Gerald only had to invite about 15 other couples to make it look real. When I told James about the cooking class for couples, I lied to him that it had been going on for a while, and that he was the only reason I never joined in. I told him that it was also the reason Gerald was teaching me personally in our home. James said nothing. He only agreed to come with me to the cooking class. I had Gerald plan for that week's Saturday, knowing that James wouldn't be working then. And then the Saturday came, but pretending was harder than I thought. All I could remember in my head was the sex Gerald and I had 2 days before, and concentrating with my raging hormones was hard. It didn't help matters that Gerald kept his distance. He was busy checking other couples' food and commenting on them, but he didn't stop by our table. I knew he was having a hard time too, but it didn't help matters because James kept looking from him to me, so I tried hard to relieve the tension. I drew Gerald's attention to our table and started to ask silly questions. Gerald understood what I was doing and started to answer my questions. I laughed when he said something about the thick paste that James mixed. I smiled when he complimented my cooking skills. When James said nothing and just continued to mix, I tried even harder. I thought if I said even more, I would sound even more convincing. So I started to tell James about how Gerald had helped improve my cooking skills, but somehow I forgot myself. I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. I was just happy when Gerald kept complimenting my skills and telling James how easy it was to teach me stuff, so I kept smiling at him too much, more than I needed to, more than I had already practiced that I would. And James noticed. No, scratch that he knew. My behavior, even though I had been trying to prove otherwise, had ruined everything. Instead of showing James I wasn't cheating, it did the complete opposite. I was still so caught up in my feelings with Gerald that I was visibly shaken when James dropped the whisk in his hand against the table with a really loud noise, instantly calling everyone's attention, and then he looked at me and he just left. I was really surprised and didn't know what to say or do. I was only embarrassed that everyone was looking at me like some strange person. So I left quickly too and tried to follow James. But James had already left. He didn't wait for me even though we came together in his car. It took me another 2 hours before I was able to get a cab and then go home. I didn't know what to expect or why James was that angry. I didn't think it was because of Gerald. I tried to make excuses for him in my head, all the way home. I thought it was probably because he had been in a bad mood all week because of work. But deep down, I knew the answer. I did, but I didn't want to face it. Not yet. But I did, because when I got home, James was sitting in the living room going through something on his phone. It was only when I got close I discovered that it was the CCTV camera. I had totally forgotten about them, and I had been bringing Gerald home and sleeping with him. Seeing Gerald and I together in that cooking class must have triggered him to look for some sort of evidence, and he must have remembered the CCTV camera we barely used since we moved into the house. I was so shocked and couldn't say anything. James just watched the different videos of different times of Gerald and I, committing the same sin over and over again. I knelt down as fast as my growing belly could allow. I was already crying and desperate too. I told him it was a mistake and swore that it would never happen again, but it didn't matter anymore. Nothing else did. James didn't care about my desperate apology, or that I was crying so hard. James just asked me a question after staring at me cry my heart out. "Is the baby mine?" I nodded, crying. The truth? I was relieved at that moment. I thought that James wouldn't throw me away because of our baby. He had always wanted a child, and I felt he wouldn't abandon me because I am the mother of his child. So I started to relax, but James was obviously not done with me. He stood up from the chair and looked at me in anger. "After the baby is born, I will request for DNA, and the baby better be mine. I will make sure, though, that you will never have any access whatsoever to my child, I promise you." I was shocked and scared. I didn't know what to do. James never said things he didn't mean, and even when I tried to beg again, he just pushed me aside and left the house. James didn't show up at the house after that, except on occasions. I tried everything that I could after that day to get James to forgive me. I called, I texted several times, but no response. Whenever he comes around, he practically ignores me like I'm a talking piece of wood. And it's been over 2 months already. It feels so overwhelming and horrible. James didn't even try to cover anything up. He called my parents that same day and told them everything. He even sent them some videos as evidence. My parents were so angry with me. My dad had decided immediately that he wanted nothing to do with me anymore. He banned everyone, too, from having anything to do with me. My siblings, my aunts, even my mom. It is just so dreadful. James seized the cards he gave me and froze my accounts, so I had no access to any money anymore. He didn't stop there either. He made sure that he used his influence to get Gerald fired and ruined his career. I didn't even know that. It was James. He came home that day smiling wickedly. He told me I had nowhere to run to now. He told me that he got Gerald fired, and that the only place he could ever work near the kitchen was as a waiter in a local restaurant. I thought I would care, but I didn't. I didn't care that Gerald's career was ruined for life. All I care and desperately want is to get back with James, even though I know how impossible that is now, not with everything I've done. And I know that the only grace I have right now is carrying our child. James will definitely file for a divorce as soon as our baby is born, and it's so horrible thinking about it, knowing that I will never be with James or our child ever again. Running isn't an option. James will find me wherever I choose to run to. And there's the fact that I have no skills to help myself and a newborn baby survive anywhere else. So there is nothing else to do than to wait until that day finally comes. It doesn't help matters that everyone hates me now. My friends, family, James. No one will take my calls or return them anymore. Somehow, the news of my affair spread everywhere. All my friends stopped talking to me. And I was no longer the friend they had once said that their social life is dead without. I can barely go out now, with the whole neighborhood pointing fingers at me, mocking me, and using me as a lesson. No disguise can work in hiding my big tummy, so I'm stuck indoors, within these walls that feel like prison. All of our pictures, The happy memories with James haunt me every moment, and I just wish that this was a horrible nightmare that I will wake up from anytime soon. But I know the truth. I've ended up destroying the only thing about my life, and there's no picking up the pieces.